2:02, and I think we'll still have people coming on, but again, everybody who's on at the start time, I think we should get started. Stefan, I'll let you talk about the work that you do through the Northeast, if you're okay with that, and then launch into it. But I will say that I'm very, very pleased to have Dr. Stefan Getz with us today, talking about community economics. Again, you've heard me say this for each presentation, but it's a great session. I think it's a new and different way of thinking about economics, and I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. So I didn't mention that Stefan is based at the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development, where he's the director, so he's at Penn State. And Stefan, welcome.
And welcome everybody to the webinar. So yes, I direct, as Heidi said, the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development, and we stretch from West Virginia all the way up to Maine. Our areas are obviously rural development, mostly economic development, and much of our work that involves developing regional food systems, which is an important opportunity in the Northeast. But we also do a lot of work on self-employment entrepreneurship, as well as the balanced use of natural resources. As you might imagine, there's a lot of growth out of cities and development that has implications for rural areas, so that as well as the large-scale development. And we'll look what's happening across the country as these forms of energy are developed. So we website NERCRD for rural development or at psu.edu. Sorry about that. So, okay. So without much further to do, you have slide on the. I don't need to go over that, Heidi, right? Because you know where you are on this. Obviously, I guess we're halfway through the stations of practice. So today, obviously, is about community economics and some basic goals this afternoon to look at basic strategies that can be used in communities to both some of the potential advantages and disadvantages of each strategy, promises and pitfalls, and then perhaps most importantly, the role of community developers and extension and outside of extension in each strategy. So as you see in the disclaimer there, or the footnote, much of this was originally developed by my colleague at Michigan State, who directs the Central Regional Center for Rural Development. And we did this a bit, but it follows on what he put together originally. So, okay, so economics, and you probably know that there are other economics such as financial, there's international, micro, macro economics, and so we have an economics branch, if you will, for particular places, that is for communities and local counties, and this session is about. And of course, because as somebody once said, if you've seen one community, you've seen one rural community, and they're very different. So a particular branch of economics basically to address these questions. As you all appreciate, I'm sure, community and resource endowments in terms of finances, infrastructure, the economics history. For example, if you have a coastal area that's from an area that's long relied on manufacturing, or just Hollywood or New York City, you have more services. You have these different places have different growth trajectories and different path dependence that they continue on doing what they were doing. Also, communities obviously differ substantially in terms of the capacity to leaders to emerge, or the capacity of those leaders who emerge to help the community move forward. And we there's something that's certain, it's that change is constant and come and go. So we have migration, but also have fundamental global changes and also technological advances that have important repercussions for communities and their and residents. So we can think of the role of the educator or the facilitator to help members of the community to understand what they can do, what they cannot do. That every community wanted to be the next Silicon Valley. That can, and I think that's fallen by the wayside. But this happen in certain kinds of communities if you don't have the right kind of workforce, for example, or you don't have enough density to like certain kinds of economic activity emerge, it's just not feasible. It's not worth spending time trying to pursue those kinds of activities. Communities develop the capacity to change nature and their fortunes, so the capacity to plan and implement. Talk about some strategies. I'll list these in a minute. And also communities to access data and other research. So educators, especially in the field, have an role in connecting the community back to the university, and also the university's resources back out to the community. And I know that can sometimes be a full-time job, but that's an important part of this as well. The major players in economic development, I'm sure you've encountered these at state development agencies, SBDCs, the network that they in terms of helping individual businesses, economic growth or local chambers of business and other business groups. These are often civic organizations such as Kiwanis clubs. We have ACE and ACE, or the regional development authorities and corporations, and then also they are often involved in plans. So if anybody who's participating thinks that there's some major entities missing here, enter in the chat box, Heidi, or
yes, please do. If you have suggestions, please enter in.
No, I lost my chat box too. Oh no, maybe okay. No, I found it. Thanks.
Okay.
You'll monitor that, Heidi, right? So
yes, I'll keep an eye out. Stefan moves. I think he's pausing for just a second. So if you want to enter any other things, I think of these as major players, but I'm also seeing some projects that I've been in lately where they're kind of expanding the players that are coming at the table. Randy, that's a great idea. So Stefan just mentioned universities.
Exactly. I don't, but any trust. I'm sure that's.
I'll keep monitoring it. So right now, that's what I'm seeing. It looks like you might have some different boxes up on your screen, Stefan.
Yeah, I have the one in the upper left-hand corner. You must have seen that just now, right? Okay. I see now. All right, I see Randy's. Okay, sorry. Just took a second here, maybe. Local residents, community members. But the other one that I think is in here is the federal government, right? I don't think that they're explicitly listed, but the rural development obviously is an important agency, and grants. And we also have the Entity Regional Commission, the Mississippi Delta Commission, and so here also the federal partners can be quite important in many instances. So, okay, so the. You also not see the full slide, or?
No, see your slides, Stefan.
Okay, so it's not distracting to have the names on this side? Okay.
We actually can't see your names.
Oh, okay.
If you want to pull up and put them onto their side, they can. So, to go.
Good, thank you. All right, so if I can get my screen unlocked here. All right, so here's some 6 strategies that I want to cover this afternoon. This sort of a general catch-all strategic plan for economic development, and see that as a bit different from the other 5 because they are maybe more concrete or more specific. I mean, you can strategically plan for a number of things, but each of the following ones are quite particular. This first one, strategic planning, is you've probably heard people say if you plan, you fail, and these are things, a strategic plan is helpful not just for communities, but obviously also for organizations, universities, and so forth. Many entities use this. And if you want to work with groups such as the EDA, Economic Development Administration, it's often essential to have a plan in order to receive funding from them. This is a pretty important part of the portfolio. Here is in terms of the process, as you might expect, it starts by being the community leaders, however they'll find, and I think you covered in some of the other sections in this course, to then try to engage a broad set of stakeholders, and you can broad well. It is on, obviously you hear depending on whom you invite to the table. So it's thoughtful about this, or to be thoughtful about this in terms of the picking to come to the table. You want it to be representative enough and diverse enough to get the full perspective of the community, but that we bring in, obviously, the more room there is also for disagreement and for the process held up. But so then, collecting data and so forth, so-called inputs, you can start thinking about processing inputs and then also developing strategic action plans once you've synthesized sort of what you've heard and that have been put forward. So some more steps along the way that you're, so for example, you can organize and identify sponsors. So I'm wondering if he has ideas about these, who in the community other than participants in the strategic plan or maybe the citizens would benefit. What kind of agencies would you approach with a proposal?
It's helpful if you expanded a little bit on what you mean. What is the role of the sponsor?
Yeah, which group would fit, say, from a strategic plan that moves the community forward?
Okay, great.
Right, so
we've other businesses in the community.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly. So, but specifically, it's often the banks and utilities that benefit where there's growth and economic development. Maybe construction companies if more people move in. So, it's often have a vital interest in bringing more folks into the, and it's worth thinking carefully about who to bring in. So, there's some sponsors. Selected sponsors. So others along the way include sort of scanning the horizon, what's happening, what are some major trends, maybe in different industries across the country and around the globe that may benefit you. Then identify some key issues that have emerged or that will emerge in the future that need to be addressed. Develop goals and strategies around the issues and address them. The last three steps sort of involve formulating action plans, implementing, and then also monitoring the results. So this is quite typical for what a strategic plan might look like in the process to be, and it's really not that different for a community.
We had a question: would a more neutral sponsor be useful as a sponsor?
Yeah, it depends on what neutral. I'm thinking maybe environmental. Somebody with an environmental interest versus maybe one that's interested in the different income classes in the society. Would be. I mean, if you the sponsor to sort of steer the direction of the strategic plan, if that's a concern, then you would want to take the money, if that makes sense.
And
so,
Lena, I'll mute you if you want to clarify your question or expand on it a little bit for Stefan. Do that verbally through your mic if you're there. If not, please feel free to type it in. So she said that she was thinking the economic development district or the city.
To the extent that that's a group that has the broad interests of the community in mind and the city, and we have these good work sometimes that may not be their own businesses and not their overall well-being of the community, then you want to be careful there. I think that's an important caveat. But if the groups are neutral, that is important. Yeah. So that's the comment. You see sort of a logical sequence that you can follow, and there are many resources available around us on how to implement these. If anyone on the call or anyone on the webinar is interested in pursuing that, there are plenty of resources in Extension. Advantages and disadvantages, as I started to say on the first slide, looking at these, this strategic planning really complements all of the other 5 activities and the 5 strategies that I'm going to talk about in the rest of the webinar. And in that sense, it's complementary, and it can think through strategically which of these strategies you would pursue. It's also not that expensive, except perhaps in terms of staff time or community leaders' time, and it's essential, or it's helpful and it's advantageous, obviously, if you achieve consensus among the group. So that's be an advantage that nobody feels left behind because you've been able to discuss and talk through the different issues. But you probably also have experienced often these plans that are thick and nobody looks at them after they've been printed and they just collecting dust on the shelf. So there are areas there's a group I do that's doing something called strategic doing, which is very conscientious about following up with the strategic plan. And I think if you were to Google that, you would find how to make sure that the plan just doesn't sit on the shelf. Developers and extension educators, what are some of the possible roles that they might play? I already mentioned the convening, which is natural, something we do well in extension, obviously. So good educating and training, resources, maybe from the public and the private sector, as well as the university, leveraging those. And so facilitating modern group meetings. These gathering data is essential, linking us back the community to the expertise that may exist in the local land-grant university to feasible and what they should be striving for. Develop a plan and then also ensuring sort of objective third accountability, if you will, is another key role. The first one, this is strategic planning, as I mentioned. I didn't say but vision statements and mission statements obviously often are part of this as well, just so the community knows where it wants to go. The first non-strategic program other than strategic planning here, as you can see, is attracting manufacturing, and this is known as smokestack chasing or industrial recruitment. Some people also call it buffalo hunting. So it's been a long time, and communities and some community developers, it's the only thing that they even consider. It offers seemingly quick fixes. If you bring in a major plant, then you're cutting ceremony. The mayor shows up, maybe the congressional party leaders come, and there's a big ribbon cutting, and a lot of press in the local media. But this is not is probably as widely used as anymore used to, because simply the opportunities for bringing in new manufacturers have just fallen by the way. There's a lot of industrial activity has shifted over to China. It's become more of a challenge. However, when I say that, it's also true that some manufacturing activity is coming back from overseas, and new opportunities on the horizon that we don't even understand yet, with things such as 3D printing. Right? So observing all this offshoring of manufacturing activity doesn't mean that there might not be a bit of a reversal, at least in some industries, in the future. And it's already happening in some of the states, such as, for example. This process with some real potential falls, such as what if you bring in the wrong kind of plant, and you've probably all the Solyndra debacle, where a lot of money was put into keeping solar panel production in the United States, and just industry flop. There's quite a bit of public was spent to keep the plant. So the question is how sure you're picking the right industry that's going to have a long-term future, and this can be a real so one of the advantages of manufacturing is obviously that it tends to have higher multipliers than some of the other sectors. So it tends to have spin-offs if it works in terms of additional jobs that extend beyond the manufacturing plant, and additional income that's generated in the community. So as for when to use this attraction, for example, a plant that's gone out of business and the facility's idle, so you already have the brick and mortar structure there. When they're going to grow anyway, you bring other kinds of business maybe emerging, and you could then try to strategically recruit, apply the inputs for those growing industries. Okay, this is also known sort of as the gap, and that's the fourth bullet here. To fill an identified gap in the community. So instead of importing products from outside that are used or assembled in the community, you may be able to bring in some of those raw material suppliers into the county, and as a result, you get an even bigger bang for the buck. So often this can complement other strategies as well, other industries. There's an entire program that's emerged around this that's called site selectors, and the hired guns basically who go around finding suitable places where manufacturers can locate, and then they negotiate with the communities, bringing them in, maybe possibly offering incentives and so forth. And obviously, that's suitable for manufacturing is an important first step. The area is too hilly, then you don't really have the flat space to put up then drainage and so forth obviously is very, very critical. Just develop these recruitment packages where they may give tax incentives, or they give credit for education of the workers, workforce development, and obviously it's essential to identify possible industries that are moving, that could fit into the community. Officers and even community representatives attend national and domestic or international trade shows to see what kinds of businesses are coming up on the horizon that may fit in locally. This idea that consultants come into a community and just drop off a report, and they study the community, and then they drop off a 25-page report that says these are the industries you should recruit, and then the consultants leave, and the community is left to report. But there's also a process in helping the community go through understanding what kinds of industries demand of a community and also what they bring. And actually a programmer, and Steve Blair up at Wisconsin is one of the leaders, and Harris out in the West, that's called Targeting Regional Economic Development. The community leaders are walked through this process, so rather than having an outside consultant just shoot in, drop off a report and leave, the extension educators often work hand in hand with the community leaders, looking at the data together, to making sense of what kinds of industries should attract, that they might think of attracting, that fit for the community. So part of this is, and this is available in a book, which is just called Targeting Regional Economic Development. But one of the perceived strategies is this community business matching and also analytical hierarchy processes. And it's basically looking at the preferences of the community in terms of the kinds of industries they would like to recruit, in terms of environmental dimensions, do they pollution and so forth, or is it less of a concern? The types of jobs that are offered, the wages, the working hours, and so forth, and then that's matched with different kinds of industries. So it's heuristics. So it's a way of bringing together these unique, diverse communities with particular industries, and them based on common characteristics. So basically preclude some firms from even coming in, or you might not want to even consider recruiting them because they just don't fit the makeup of the community, the desires of the residents, whereas the firms might make a much better. So that, and analytical hierarchy processes, and as I said, there are more resources about this, and it's also being used by some of the programs in helping think this through. And it's much more of a process helpful to the community rather than just a report. Potential roles for educators and facilitators, possible pitfalls. The Silicon Valley, not every community is going to be able to bring those in, bring new Silicon Valley type industry. It's often a long-term nature. It's a long-term investment that's beyond just an election cycle in terms of investing in the skills of the local workforce, that they change and that they match what the industry needs. Educators can also help community leaders gauge the strengths and weaknesses of the community, what they provide, what may be missing. Maybe it's an airport, maybe it's a road, maybe it's broadband that prevents certain businesses from coming in. I mentioned earlier, and educators can often also serve as a point person with the EDA. And then grading is generally a good. It's an important service to provide, and also fostering a board development, so that you think of having an industrial recruitment / development board that is targeted at these activities. So that's an important role that an educator can play. So, and I just want to point that some manufacturing is coming back, and there may be opportunities to target locations in particular locations. So, in terms of to different communities.
Stefan, bring two things to your attention. One, we had a question about where someone can find information about the community business matching process and resources. I did send a link to the Choices article, but is that still at Purdue, or where would more about that process?
So, community. Okay, so that's Taurus at the University of Nevada, Reno. They've changed the name a bit, but it is described in the Targeting Regional Economic Development book that's published by Village.
Okay.
And so, Kristen?
The other one was, I just wanted to maybe you saw that Rob mentioned that.
Yes.
Did you see his comment that they did have a company come back, and he was saying that, in part it was due to some of the economic factors in China where they had gone to the labor and increase for American-made goods. So I just thought that was an interesting comment and wanted to just point it out and be sure you saw it.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good point, Bob. And I mean, losing manufacturing activity to even lower cost countries like and so forth, but often companies are realizing that there's a value to being close to the consumers, and they can make production changes more quickly, and the quality of the workforce is just not the same. So I was just reading that Apple is manufacturing, or at least selling, the latest iPads and also the new books and computers, selling them in the United States more and more. Even component parts may still come from overseas, but the company that there are, in addition to some benefits to overseas, there are also some significant costs. So people who are manufacturing, or the U.S. as a manufacturing powerhouse, maybe some 10, 20 years ago, they're probably reading that idea, and the last word has not been said on that. So now, though, that when this manufacturing moves back, that it's often very, very technical or very technology intensive. It uses very little labor. Some of the new garment manufacturers that are all automated, high-speed equipment, so they have maybe a computer operator looking after it. It's not the old jobs that, we had 20, 30 years ago in the Carolinas. So change is constant, as was already earlier. So this business retention and expansion idea, and there's two types here. There's a sort of a lone ranger visits businesses and fixes the problems, and there are companies out there that are doing this. There's some successful ones based in California that provide these services around the world, and those are very sophisticated types of service activities. And the problem is that these are often not available for rural areas, or they're simply they're not affordable to smaller communities. And the ranger idea, where you just have an expert coming in and then leaving again, is not generally intended for extension professionals, because again, there's less of an engagement with the community. Better model really is to draw in members. Sometimes these universities bring in students along with that who live in the community for a few days to get a sense of what the opportunities are in terms of retaining and expanding local businesses. So they're called volunteer visitors, often coming out of extension and bringing in along with them students. This is started in the landscape architecture area. But so survey of businesses, have a committee review, so the mix and the types of businesses, the longevity, how long they've been there, maybe some threats that they're facing, and looking broadly at the community and what it offers as a package, rather than focusing on individual firms or individual businesses, looking more in a broader sense or more community-wide. And applications, this is often manufacturing, for example. How can you help them improve things, make sure that they have the they need to stay in the community, not have barriers that might cause them to leave. It's also often with retailing and agriculture and businesses in general. So, the volunteer visitor program you may have heard of, there are many roles. One of them is, for example, the Meet development programs, where many communities are concerned about business, the downtown core, and what they can do to keep some firms there so that you maintain a downtown business sector, and to prioritize and to sustain these kinds of efforts as well. Sure. So you've saying it's much to keep a customer than to try to gain a new one. So it's good to your own customers, and it's very similar to this. It's much cheaper for you to keep your business entity than have to go out and try and replace it and others to take its place. In terms of dollars invested, and you have a much more efficient creation of jobs or keeping the jobs in the community. The community's leadership pull together because they know that they're going after a common worthwhile goal to the businesses that are there. The idea that the community steps forward and tells the business, look, we're concerned about you and we want to help you, that's received by the business owners, because if all he talks about is bringing in new businesses from the outside, that's obviously not good for the existing long-term businesses, and they feel neglected and appreciated. Often this is also used to introduce the idea of succession planning. If as people retire, especially, they want to pass on their that they spent a lifetime building up. This is a good occasion to start to talk about that. Some caveats here as well, that if you to find a leader to do this in the community, that person must have very strong social networks within, maybe also outside. And not reverse, obviously, some important economic fundamental. For example, if your economic base is declining, if it's logging is in a slump because in the construction industry, the housing industry is in a downturn, that's very difficult to reverse, and you can't reverse those just through business retention and expansion programs. So that's important. Or if the technology by firms is changing, but your workers don't have the right kinds of skills, then that might also be an important fundamental that the community can't reverse just by itself. The caveats, it's important to get the local economic development community to buy into this, and it can be challenging to find business types that you want to support, that they get along with each other, that they support one another, that they're not at odds, such as, for example, a bed and breakfast may have problems supporting a firm that pollutes the environment, brings custom for the bed and breakfast. So that can certainly be an issue. And as I already alluded to, you can't fix all the problems that occur. And in most of these activities, it's essential to get the leadership of the community to buy in as well. And we have sort of 5 key roles that the community or an educator can play, including sort of leading, being a member of the task force, leading the task force, even again facilitating members in the community. And educators are also well connected to outside resources, whether it's just the land-grant university in the state, or maybe even in one state over, or through our networks across the country. And the community developer obviously can also play the role of a volunteer visitor and give feedback to the community. So, speaking, and the next one is downtown development, and I already alluded to this as well. It's often a concern as Walmarts and the other big box spring up on the outskirts of town that put considerable pressure on the long-standing businesses, and communities have suffered through this in the sense that they're using economic activity in the core business district. Activities is pulled outside and into the more. So basics here, what we're talking about is sort of physical enhancement preservation of historic and interesting buildings, and there have been some serious academic studies of this, that people really are willing to pay for economics, sort of the aspects, and just the fact some of these buildings have value because they're old and pretty. It's an important area. There's really economic value to be created here. Or think about marketing through advertising and events, and again, it's something that one individual business may not be able to do along. But if you get an association of business owners together, they might be able to put money together to develop flyers and so forth, or to have advertising campaigns that may be promoted elsewhere, the big cities, to bring in customers and so forth. So it's important to coordinate among the merchants, that they know that this is happening and what there might be, and it's to develop, if you can, sort of a brand for your town. And really important, by the way, and there are also spillovers that can be created here. For example, if you have a downtown business that's boarded up, and you somehow are able to refurbish it and bring in a store that sets up, if that's additional customers who wouldn't come otherwise, those customers might also shop in the adjacent businesses. So that is what they call a public good or a public spillover, in the sense that you're helping this one store, it's benefiting the wider town community. So that's to keep in mind. But thinking about this branding, you've all heard of the Branson, and obviously when somebody says Las Vegas, you have a very particular idea of what that means. Orlando, think of New World maybe. But other regions have brands such as Traverse City in Michigan. International has a dubious distinction of being the coldest place. But ideas here like Philadelphia, you have an association with Paris. You have certain ideas about Cleveland, so the Mayo Clinic has some kind of being at the heart of, or being an important medical community. North Carolina promoting local foods very heavily. So tools or ways of getting communities to be unique, so that they're not all the same. Anybody on the webinar list has for their community, whether they have a certain brand that they're associated with? Historic. Okay, good. There's one. Yeah. It's up there. Also has that kind of into racing. Okay. Austin, absolutely. Quite famous, and then Farm to Fork, interesting. Sacramento, yeah. Good examples. Thank you. And this can sort of additional buzz around a place. It could bring in additional from outside, bring in economic activity. Yeah, Walla Walla. Yeah, onions, right? And then there's the Vidal out of two Batavia business. More fees. That's good. That's a slogan too. Flood Myra, okay. Waterloo, yes. Yeah, we're actually here in Bowlesbury, but I know that it's claimed more than one place to be the birthplace of the memorial. Okay, good. Yeah, right in Wild, and Virginia also has a similar one. So, okay, good. So, some advantages of this is, of course, developing community associated with a brand. It's also can keep customers going downtown. There's some environmental benefits. Presumably, they don't travel as far to go to the outskirts to do their shopping. Can help foster a sense of community. So has benefits in terms of bringing in newcomers, but also if you develop a park or something like that downtown, then it can create a more pleasant place for residents as well. But as with all of these strategies that I'm talking about here today, in that they don't necessarily work for every community, right? And what if you build it and they don't come? That's happened many, many times where you have resorts that just don't, and capacity, don't bring in enough paying customers. It's also if communities want to emulate other ones, if they just copy what other communities are already doing, then it can create a sense of sameness rather than a unique sense of place. If it is too successful, then houses, rents, apartment rent can go up, and then you sometimes find that with property taxes going up as well, that long-term residents can no longer afford to live there if they're living on fixed incomes, and that causes sort of gentrification problems. And then some preferences change, right? So what's interesting, cool one year may be old and bland the next, and if you invest in the wrong area or the wrong kind of brand, then that's a problem. Okay, so use it when you basically an infrastructure that's sound already. Okay, so you don't have to rebuild a whole hotel area, or you don't have to improve your roads and bridges in order to. The potential marketplaces is really important. Those of us in the Eastern Seaboard, we're close to New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, D.C. So there are many there in terms of bringing in visitors who are not from. So if you have a certain uniqueness, something that makes your place distinctive, whether it's the coldest or with the best vistas or what, but if there's something that makes it out, it can be successful. So potential development roles, as I already mentioned, the landscape architecture is often start this as along with the BNE, but it's this idea of a charrette that you bring in folks from the outside who take an objective look at the key, identify assets, maybe some weaknesses, but the computers can help with the planning as well. Historic preservation workshops are bringing in experts from the outside who can the National Endowment of Arts for the Arts has at least had funding to do this actually. Comes grant writing workshops. Town associations, business associations, and networks, I already mentioned those. That's quite critical. Developing sort of Main Street programs to bring in, maybe have certain weekends to celebrate certain things that bring more customers. And then also this First Impressions program is also a university-based extension program where you can have volunteers, sometimes students and faculty coming into the community and just giving a first impression. What do you see when you drive into town? What are things that attract you? What are things that maybe eyesores that a outsider would find objectionable or particularly attractive? And then you can pass it on to the community and to do something about it. So here's some key roles for community developers. And I've already alluded to this in a way because I've been talking about tourism and bringing in people from the outside, but so another key strategy is this tourism and recreation development area. And you can see there's a difference between tourism versus recreation depending on where people are coming from, right? So with tourism, people coming from outside the area, but if you're recreating, and that to describe long residents who live there anyway. And so these are logistic, but from an economic development perspective, it's important to note if a tourist coming from another state, that's an injection into the state economy, which has a multiplier effect and so forth. So that's a bit different from recreating or recreation, where you have basically existing residents spending that they might have spent at the movie theaters at the instead, just to give as an example. So with recreation, you are basically redistributing income within the community, whereas with tourism, you have the potential to bring in new outside, which have a bigger economic bang for the buck. But the synergy here also, obviously, in terms of just using the facilities, because the site can use the same ones as the residents, and especially if aren't around, maybe if it's seasonal tourism, then the residents can still benefit from this. And you have this around lake communities, for example, that have just an influx of people during the summer, but they also have long-term residents who can recreate there. So basics again, what understand tourism versus recreational activities is just to inventory the current visitor activities. What are they doing? What are the opportunities? Is it visiting vineyards? Is it just hanging out at the beach, or hiking, visiting monuments or events? So this story of that can be very helpful. And so it's important to note this distinction between business versus leisure visits. You have people in business, say, to a conference or to a festival, and then they just leave again, and you don't think much of it. But my colleague Bill Schaffstall here, he talks about the Apple Festival up in Franklin County, one of the Pennsylvania counties, and he's asked a question. People come from all over the country to visit, to celebrate this Apple Festival, but nobody ever talks about getting about staying potentially. What are these footloose entrepreneurs who can pick up their baby, move there, and both a long-term resident or long-time resident, but also hire people and just set up there. So it's something about that from outside that you think about maybe getting into to come back and live and work. So, but you can also think that business visits can lead to leisure visits. So people come in and they enjoy the community. They may come back with their family later to so part of this will be not just to inventory the current visitor activities, but also the tourist assets that may be attracting them, and just to see what maybe better promoted, how they can be put together as a package to bring people, and then plans around this as well. And, it doesn't do the community, but if it has a great tourism industry, people don't know about it. So marketing and advertising beyond the borders is quite important. And so we can think of listing individual businesses with their own marketing plans, not just for the community, but for their own particular economic activity. They think about hospitality. It's interesting to read about this when certain host the Olympics. There's always a competition for every 4 years, every 2 years with the Winter Olympics. But they're taxi drivers to treat foreigners properly, or the guests to the community properly. So that's kind of this hospitality training that this alludes to, that you make sure that the residents are in the approach and to make visitors feel appreciated, so if you want them to come back. It's kind of a first impressions program that I already mentioned earlier under the and sounds. It's the same that you just have neutral outsiders come in to give you a first impression of the community. All right. So, okay. Advantages of the tourism. One way of this is that it's indeed a growing sector, because obviously baby boom retiring, increasing numbers, and as they have more time, many of them are interested in just touring the country and learning more about the United States. So it's definitely a growth sector. I mean, it may have taken a beating in the last recession, but as the economy recovers, it'll likely, and the state of the dollar in any given year, whether the dollar is cheap or expensive, or whether the dollar buys foreign currency or not, it can also help stay here. But if the dollar is expensive overseas, currencies are expensive, then people stay here, but at the same time, that means it's cheaper for foreigners to come here. So that can be an advantage in terms of bringing in more people. So even can help make a town and keep it more livable, and bring in new resources and new funds for renovations and so forth that allow businesses to reinvest in themselves. It can also support for local amenities, as you can see there. Help attract manufacturing firms if you can put together the lifestyle packages that would attract these firm owners. Out of a congested area, for example, and your community offers you call it like lifestyle. So, and also you've probably been reading about this agro and ecotourism that's becoming quite popular as people try to learn more about their environment and maybe also where their food comes from. This is also a booming opportunity and an advantage of developing tourism. It also a bit of a mind shift, though. I mean, traditionally people have thought of tourism and associated jobs as being low wage and not particularly interesting, but there's some work out of the Economic Research Service at the USDA on tourist recreation counties that shows that those counties do quite well in terms of income growth and the average wages that they pay. Tourism is it's a with it may seem like it's the same on par with manufacturing, but in fact it can be a quite important engine of growth. It's just seasonal, like if it's only visitors in the winter, then the of the year, it's only in the summer, then what do you do during the winter? So it can be problematic of being seasonal. It can also be very fragmented. You don't feel like there's a whole community that supports them. It's just that businesses here and there, and it's just that it can be more effective if they're together more. So it's difficult to get businesses to cooperate with one another if they don't see the larger picture or they don't see the benefit of promoting tourism, and especially the business need some development system in order to interact more effectively with the tourists. So when the community is undiscovered assets, that it could be just nature trails, it could be historic, it could be springs, it could be historic springs, etc., etc. When it's undiscovered or the infrastructure is underutilized, if you have hotel spaces that could be filled, these are all opportunities for enhancing it. All right. Moving then to this idea of recreation, which I already mentioned is more looking at the long-term residents rather than people from the outside. There's some basic things you can do here is focus on some of the amenities such as parks, trails, and libraries, sporting facilities. Again, you can identify gaps to think about what additional service could you provide that would bring in more people to use the existing ones. Able to pay, what can people afford for the local to pay for local services? Is the public and community willing to support this? Rather keep the would they rather not have these kinds of recreational activities be developed in the community? Fine now is that these are paid for with taxes and recreation fees, so or user fees. These are the great benefits to the community that can be out of this. Promoting this can help to reduce outmigration, that long-term residents decide that they would rather stay in the community rather than move out. Actually, they look for more recreation opportunities as they retire. It can help with industrial recruitment. It can be a strong benefit for terms if they find that they're pleasant or they're good opportunities to spend weekends and evenings, perhaps in the summer. And it can also go hand in hand with tourism development, as I already mentioned earlier. So sell, though, because some community leaders may not or may not see much benefit to it. All right, so the large owners may oppose it. They don't want hunters coming on their properties, or they don't want the four vehicles near for recreation. These user fees may be difficult to enforce if you think about fencing natural. It's just difficult to do, and so you can't charge the fee. I mean, when the parks during the shutdown, you've been reading that they closed obviously the main entrances to the parks, but people tried to sneak in anyway. In Yellowstone or Yosemite, and they took helicopter tours over the Grand Canyon because they couldn't get down into it. So this is another way that these fees or the ability to keep people out may be difficult. And full assessment of costs and uses of recreation dollars that are raised. A review of the first 5 or so strategies, including the strategic planning. I'm just wondering if there are any questions before we turn to the lesson. Or are there examples that others have seen? So, yeah, evaluation surveys could be used. That's a good point, Rob, to sort of get the of people in the community. There's a method called travel cost method, where you interview visitors, tourists, in the U.S., or you just actually can do a survey of their license plate to see how far they've come, and from that you can get an assessment of what they're willing to pay, because that's sort of the minimum. It's the cost of driving there. Both of those are good tools to get a better understanding of what the community is offering.
So you raised a good question. Are tricks of the trade to get people to see why the bigger picture is important? That's part of the same pie. Is there anything that you all are doing in your communities to support that? Well, because I think that's important. I think certainly the strategic planning is one way, and I've seen that used effectively. I think, Stefan, in particular, in our SET projects, that was a really nice way to bring people together that hadn't been brought together before, to think about how their different initiatives and different goals were actually complementary.
Yes. A good point. In fact, I wanted to mention the SET activity when I was on the strategic planning part, but that it's essential. I mean, I don't have any magic bullet solutions for this, but the call have had experience, or maybe this is covered in some of the other sessions as well. It seems to me more like a group dynamic process type issue rather than an economic development per se.
Yeah, I think it's for sure part of that community development process, really bringing people together for conversations. So, Andy.
Definitely. Yeah, it can do wonders in that they see that that people have to work together, or that they really develop a spirit of community. Our community that you've quite actually help when people help each other out, that this increases social capital in the community. So
I'll just send a link to the Stronger Economies Together program that Stefan and I were just referencing. So this is something supported by USDA Rural Development and the Regional Rural Development Centers in partnership with land grant faculty across the country, and it's designed to multi-regional economic plan implementation. They've built a really fabulous curriculum around that, so I'll just put in the links so people can learn more. In the meantime, there's a couple questions. Rob, basically, like I said, to ask people something, how much would you be willing to pay? Oh, so you're letting people know what the contingent valuation methodology is. Comments there. Great.
Yeah, right. That's of community pride or a lack of community cohesion. So that's with West Virginia was going to attract the Boy Scouts Jamboree, which I think is every 4 years, and that's like 1,000 or more Boy Scouts sitting on a place in any given year, and it's a one opportunity for businesses to to get injection of funds from the outside, but it also creates issues because some of the landowners don't want all these people tromping over their property. So on one hand, it's an incredible example of what tourism or outside can do in a community, the benefits that they can do, but it also can create strife. So I have to think through because they're losers and they're gainers and they're winners, and it can no matter which one of these strategies you adopt actually. Milestone anniversaries, that's good example. Okay, we're about an hour into this, and this is the one which is and is on these, which where I actually spend my own much time in terms of academic research. But the last one is you can think of as being the other strategies are mostly looking at let's see here. If we are looking at development side, like bringing in manufacturing plants, then entrepreneur communities is moving at development from the inside. Okay, this is important, really an important strategy, very complementary to some of the other ones. But so there's a whole curriculum. There are books written about these community systems where you start entrepreneur, very basic idea to sow slow growth, and you get venture capital funding from the outside until you take the business to scale. But there's an entire range of community systems. It's sometimes likened to the baseball minor field, and you progress until you get up to the majors. But it's the idea that the community step forward or supports the individual entrepreneurs. And at the same time, even though I said there's the systems and the books written about this, but there's also no one-size-fits-all recipe, whether you focus on individual firms or whether you focus on entire businesses in a community. Here is that you look at the owners of small to medium-sized businesses, and there's compelling evidence to suggest that these are the most important engines of growth in all American communities. Really, it's not the boxes and the stores that come to the outside that help develop local economic growth and development. It's existing smaller local that are the engines of growth. Some common approaches here include sort of business advocates, that more experienced business leaders step forward and they help nascent businesses that are going to emerge. This idea of youth entrepreneurship is very important. We know that kids want to often are very curious about running their own businesses, and with unemployment being as horrific as it is right now, not just in the States but around the world, I think this is an important area for development, that we think about how can we help our young people start their own firms sooner rather than later. So the relations advocate or coaching ideas is peer-to-peer networking and problem solving. That this idea you don't do it as well on your own than if you get together with other folks. The business incubators, these can be, for example, for foods, that you have a incubator type kitchen where you can process prepares and sampling and so forth, and that's another important approach. But it's also for other industries, of course. It's that you focus on the entrepreneur as an individual rather than the business as a collective. So these are some of the common approaches that are used in entrepreneurship development. So some approaches include that you have a firm that maybe sells goods across the country, or even if they're sold locally, you don't really need any special locational advantages if you can buy the services and the inputs that the business needs, basically where, so you can do this kind of thing anywhere. And the advantage to consider is if that the business succeeds, it will likely stay in the community. So it's a lot easier to nurture and to have a firm locally to keep a person there than it is to go outside and try to recruit businesses from elsewhere. A third is that it's not hard really to convince people that entrepreneurship is a good idea. This idea is spreading more than that. Good to have people start their own firms rather than on chain store other firms or that come from the outside. So some disadvantages that are listed here. Sometimes there's a competition with SBDs, the Small Business Development Centers, although it doesn't have to be that way, because often these businesses, the SBDCs, focus on individuals, whereas the work that comes out of Extension looks more at the entire community and what the SBD can do to foster businesses, and that's quite different. So facilitation programs and ones we already saw for the hometown development and so forth. So it's often to get funding. There's a lot of competition for venture capital funds, and unless you have a really standout idea, as a firm, it's difficult to get grants. Although there are also federal grants, USDA, that provide funding. Often it can take a long time, unlike bringing a manufacturing plant from the outside where you can see the building go up and so forth. It's very difficult to track how a small business may be growing and expanding, how the business owners understand how to do things more effectively. So it's an investment, and it does well with political cycles where people show success in 4 years. They voted out of office, so patience. And it requires a culture change in the sense that you don't think your economic salvation has to come from the outside, but it can. You increasingly, as local economic developers, understand that it can help locally too, and that does shift in thinking. Can you use it? Well, the local economy is threatened basically because the economic base, so its livelihood is drying up. We've thought about Detroit recently in the news. Used to be the American pilots for automobile manufacturing, and it's suffered obviously now in the recent years as it's lost its competitive advantage. So these are all options when it's important thinking about homegrown talent, your homegrown people's own businesses. So shifting now, for example, to specialized battery manufacturing, it's trying to become known for that, but also it's also promoting its local foods industry much more with much more. Some roles for community developers. Community assessments kind of assess whether the community provides a kind of nurturing foundation or background for local business emerge. It can start bringing resources to develop incubators. Again, these are things that one individual firm cannot do, but if you had a collection of 10, 30 firms, they might gather some seed money to start an incubator office space. In that community, the Small Business Development Center or the land grant, if the value-added center, and some of the universities do have that, so that can provide connection. Form and foster these peer networks, make sure the right people are talking with each other, that everybody, so the resources that exist. Coach role, if they have some training or some background in business development, and that's obviously a key contribution. Also, youth entrepreneurship program. There's a fellow by the name of Brent Hales who's done this very successfully, working with schools in Mississippi, and he's now moved to Minnesota. But there are youth entrepreneurship programs available as well, and these are for not only helping kids think about working themselves in the future, but also things such as keeping them in school, frankly, because they see sort of the connection there more readily than if they don't have anything. So, and then we'll develop these community recognition systems where these entrepreneurs are celebrated and recognized, and that's not a trivial thing.
I'll just add to your comment about Brent Hale's work. I saw him present on that at a think, National Extension Conference, and was just amazed at what some of those young people were doing that had gone through that program, some of them putting themselves through college, but it was really a deliberate, intentional, strategic way of helping them understand business development, and what entrepreneurship is, and they actually started their own businesses that were long-lasting businesses, so I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, especially if you think about all the youth unemployment and that they'll never catch up, you know, if they don't get into the workforce soon. These kids, it's just a travesty, and having them work for themselves can be very effective. So,
interesting.
Do you have comments? So I guess are these questions or?
They're primarily comments.
Okay.
Jose asked about that their, funding sources, loans are dwindling. So I just asked if there were any alternatives to that, and he mentioned that lending circles have been very or have been effective particularly for Latino entrepreneurs. So if I did that right, Jose, right? He said it's increased their credit ratings as well. So Maggie just said youth entrepreneur is happening in public high school, so that's great.
Yeah, good examples out there.
Andy had one question, right? Andy, you asked with the for clarification, and I didn't see it, but you asked if Stefan said, it's how do you keep them? So if you start with the business that you have as a strategy, what keeps those businesses there? And Andy, I wasn't sure if you were saying that businesses become effective or strong, well developed, that they leave the area. So if you could clarify that, and feel free to respond as well.
Yeah, to me.
I'm thrown out there, so I think it was directed to you, Stefan, if you have some feedback.
The typical manufacturing firm can be recruited, right? So they go to the best offer, and there are companies that really take advantage of this, whether it's a tax credit, whether it's help with developing the workforce, and so forth. They just move, find the cheapest labor and the best bribes, which is what it often amounts to. So the point with this is that if you have a homegrown entrepreneur who has found and so forth in the history in the community, they'll be less likely to be this bit of that, because they care about the community, they invest back into it. And there are plenty of examples like that about philanthropy. The Rupri Entrepreneurship Program does a lot of work on this. So that's the key. Of course, it can happen that the firm grows so big that it expands, that it goes outside. It can't survive more. Like Gerber Foods, I think, is an example that was started in rural Michigan, and eventually didn't have enough resources there, not a big enough workforce to expand successfully. So they had to relocate into a major urban area. But if you think about it, which started as a tiny single shop operation in Bentonville, Arkansas, they basically there and they made the community into what it is today, right? So Walmart's not going to move the headquarters to move somewhere else, because Sam Walton, the founder, really wanted to stay in the community. So that's kind of the idea here. It's like if you're able to recruit another company into your community, well, probably another community is going to be able to recruit away from you a few years. So the homegrowers are more likely to stay in the community. That's the main point there.
Okay.
I hope that answers it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Great questions and comments. So, okay, went through potential roles. So potential community roles in this area, and I think this is actually the last slide. It's you can facilitate or bring outside to all of the slides, but that's to outside facilitators. Not to say that can only be found outside the community. Often the experts are already there or in the state, but an educated developer can bring in facilitators to make some of this work happen. We can help in conflict resolution just because we are sides. We present objective science-based information that we can find, and it can help with conflict unit resolution. And by the same token, communities back to universities and as well as data and other resources that may be available. And we can also identify resources for any action teams that emerge around any of these. And we alluded to, and whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's documents for strategic planning or strategic doing, educators can often identify additional resources for communities to use in terms of what's worked elsewhere, hasn't worked, and what they might adopt. So that's the slide. So if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them, or we can tap into the collective wisdom of folks' call or the webinar. So thanks.
Sure. No, thank you, Stefan. While others are thinking about some questions they might have for Stefan, I'll just pose it. I'm sure you've heard of these different strategies, or at least some of them at different times. What kind are you seeing happen in your community? Is it a mix? Are people focused primarily on one? Are they diversifying? What do you see in the communities that you're working in? So hopefully a few of you are typing and responding to that question. Just wanted to point, so I've tried to type in some of the resources or at least links to some of the things that Stefan mentioned, so I hope that wasn't too overwhelming, but I wanted to put you in touch with some of the things that he mentioned because I think they are very helpful. I also just want to re-emphasize the value of the Northeast Center's web. And team have a lot of the publications that he's mentioned on entrepreneurship, on regional economic development. You'll see at the top of their page links to community development, eco-development, entrepreneurship, et cetera, and within those multiple resources that are really worth just perusing if you get a few minutes to take some time. I think you'll find some valuable stuff there. So.
Thanks for the plug, Heidi. And I might mention for the other centers as well, if you're in the West or in Michigan, you might look at the North Central Center's website or the Southern Rural Development Center. And we do have our resources, our materials tend to be geared more towards the issues in our region. But
good point. Okay, there are no other questions for Stefan. I'm going to ask him to advance the slide and just give you a quick overview of what we're going to be doing next week. We have Dan Kalf from Kansas State University, and he'll be talking about power dynamics. Again, I think you'll find this interesting. I think you some neat insights into thinking about power in your community beyond what we often think of as obvious one. So I think you'll find it interesting and look forward to having you attend next week. Here's some related discussion questions that you address in the Moodle again. Let us know what you're thinking relative to power structures in your community. And then I'll just mention that Mary Peabody should be back with us next week. And in fact, I think she'll be leading the sessions for the last 3. So just please know it's been a pleasure working with you. I'll still be checking into the Moodle site and possibly on the calls, but all for the ways that you are participating, for the good feedback that you're providing during the sessions, and let us know if you have any questions or concerns. We're here to facilitate your learning in this series. So, Stefan, thanks so much. Again.
Thanks, everybody on the webinar. Take care.
Okay. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you next